It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings when the sun isn't too harsh, and there's just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. Detective Chief Robert Chen had been planning this garage sale for weeks, and he finally had a weekend off to make it happen. After spending more than 2 decades climbing the ranks in the police department, his garage had become a museum of forgotten things. Old furniture from his bachelor days, kitchen gadgets he'd never used, boxes of books he'd read once and never touched again, and enough random stuff to fill 3 driveways. Robert had set his alarm for 6 in the morning, which felt like sleeping in compared to his usual 4:30 wake-up calls. He'd dragged everything out to the driveway while the neighborhood was still quiet, organizing it all on folding tables he'd borrowed from his sister. He wasn't trying to make a fortune here. Honestly, he just wanted the space back in his garage and maybe enough cash to take his girlfriend out for a nice dinner. By 7:30, he had everything set up with little price tags he'd written by hand the night before. $5 for the coffee maker that he'd gotten as a housewarming gift but never unboxed. $10 for the perfectly good bookshelf that just didn't fit his new place. $20 for the leather office chair that had one tiny tear in the back. Everything was priced to move. The early birds started showing up around 8. There's always that crowd of people who wake up at dawn on Saturdays specifically to hunt for garage sale treasures. Robert didn't mind. He actually enjoyed it. After spending his workdays dealing with the worst of humanity, criminals, victims, paperwork that never seemed to end, it was refreshing to just chat with normal people about normal things. An older gentleman bought the bookshelf right away, telling Robert about his granddaughter who was moving into her first apartment. A young couple debated over a set of mixing bowls for 10 minutes before deciding to take them. A teenager asked if Robert would take $3 for a lamp marked at 5, and Robert agreed because he genuinely didn't care. It was just nice to see his stuff going to people who'd actually use it. Robert's neighbor from 2 houses down, an engineer named Tom, stopped by with his morning coffee to browse and chat. They'd only talked a handful of times since Robert had moved in 3 months ago. The job kept him busy, sometimes pulling 70-hour weeks. Tom ended up buying an old toolbox and they talked about the neighborhood, the local restaurants, normal neighbor stuff that Robert rarely had time for. That's when he noticed her. She was walking down the sidewalk with the kind of purpose that Robert had learned to recognize over his years in law enforcement. It was the walk of someone who had decided they were right about something and was on a mission to prove it. She was probably in her mid-50s, wearing a white polo shirt that had some kind of logo embroidered on the chest. He couldn't make out what it said from where he was standing, but she was also carrying a fancy leather folder and had her phone pressed against her ear. Robert had a feeling this wasn't going to be a casual browsing situation. The woman made a beeline straight for his driveway, barely glancing at the items for sale. A couple who had been looking at his old microwave noticed her approach and kind of drifted away, probably sensing the same thing Robert did. The energy had shifted. She ended her phone call with a curt, "I'll call you back," and stopped right in front of Robert's main table, the one with the kitchen stuff on it. She wasn't smiling. "Excuse me," she said, and her tone made it clear this wasn't really a question. "Are you the homeowner here?" Robert put down the lamp he'd been wrapping in newspaper for a customer. "Yes, ma'am, that's me. Can I help you with something?" "I'm Patricia Hendricks. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association." She said it the way some people announce they're a doctor or a lawyer, like the title carried weight that demanded immediate respect. "Are you aware that you're currently in violation of our community bylaws?" Robert kept his expression neutral. After years of interrogating suspects and dealing with hostile witnesses, he'd mastered the art of the poker face. "I wasn't aware of any violation, no. What seems to be the problem?" Patricia opened her leather folder with a practiced flip and pulled out a printed document. It looked official, with multiple pages stapled together and highlighted sections. She'd come prepared. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our HOA bylaws clearly states that any resident wishing to conduct a garage sale, yard sale, or similar outdoor sale of personal items must submit a formal request to the HOA board no less than 14 days prior to the proposed sale date. She looked up from the document, her eyebrows raised like a teacher catching a student who forgot to do homework. "Did you submit such a request?" "No, ma'am, I didn't," Robert admitted. "To be honest, I just moved in about 3 months ago and I haven't received all the HOA documentation yet." I've gotten a few emails about dues and stuff, but nothing about garage sale permits. That's not an excuse, Patricia said sharply. Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them. When you purchased your home, you signed documents agreeing to abide by all HOA regulations. Robert took a breath. He could feel his jaw tightening slightly, but he kept his voice calm. I understand. Look, if this is a problem, I'm happy to pack everything up. I'm not trying to cause any issues here. I just wanted to get rid of some stuff. But Patricia wasn't interested in compromise. Robert could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about solving a problem. This was about making a point. He'd seen that look before, usually on people who had a little bit of authority, and enjoyed exercising it maybe a bit too much. It's too late for that, she said, and there was something almost triumphant in her voice. The violation has already occurred. But more importantly, you've created a situation that's attracting excess traffic to our residential street, potentially blocking access for emergency vehicles, and creating noise disturbances for your neighbors on their weekend morning. Robert glanced around. There were maybe 4 people browsing his sale. His driveway was completely clear, and he'd made sure not to block any part of the sidewalk. The noise was people talking in normal conversational tones, but he didn't say any of that. Not yet. I've already contacted the authorities, Patricia announced, loud enough that the few remaining shoppers definitely heard her. The police will be here shortly to shut down this unauthorized sale. Perhaps next time you'll think twice before blatantly disregarding community standards. We have rules here for a reason, and they apply to everyone equally. She emphasized that last word, everyone, in a way that made it clear she thought Robert believed he was somehow special or exempt. Which was ironic, considering what she didn't know. Robert just nodded slowly. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth, not mocking. Just the smile of someone who'd been in enough situations to know exactly how this one was going to play out. Okay, he said simply. I guess we'll wait for the police then. Patricia seemed momentarily thrown by his calm acceptance. She'd probably expected him to argue or get angry or defensive. That's usually what happened when she pulled out the rulebook and the threats. But Robert just stood there, arms crossed, completely relaxed. Yes, well, good, Patricia said, clutching her folder a bit tighter. They should be here within 10 to 15 minutes. I suggest you use that time to start packing up. Robert didn't move to pack anything. He just smiled a little wider and said, I think I'll wait and see what the officers have to say first, if that's all right with you. Patricia's face reddened slightly, but she didn't leave. Instead, she positioned herself near the end of the driveway, like a security guard making sure he didn't try to sneak away. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously, probably updating the HOA group chat about the dangerous criminal running an illegal garage sale operation. Tom, the neighbor, caught Robert's eye and mouthed, "Sorry," before quietly slipping away with his toolbox. The other shoppers had scattered. It was just Robert, his tables full of stuff, and Patricia standing watch. The morning was about to get a lot more interesting. The next 10 minutes felt longer than they actually were. Patricia had planted herself at the edge of the driveway like she was guarding a crime scene. She kept glancing at her phone, then at Robert, then back at her phone. Every few seconds she'd type something, probably keeping her HOA cronies updated on the situation. Robert could almost imagine the messages. Waiting for police. Subject refusing to comply. Will update soon. Robert, for his part, just sat down in one of the folding chairs he'd been planning to sell. He pulled out his own phone and started scrolling through emails. Work stuff, mostly. Even on his day off, the job never really stopped. There were always cases to review, reports to approve, meetings to schedule. But at least he could do it while sitting in the sunshine instead of under the fluorescent lights of his office. A car drove by slowly, the driver clearly curious about what was happening. Patricia straightened up, probably hoping it was the police, but it was just someone from the next street over who'd seen the garage sale signs Robert had put up. They took one look at Patricia's stern face and kept driving. You know, Patricia said, breaking the silence, this really could have been avoided if you'd just followed the proper procedures. The HOA exists to maintain property values and community standards. We're not the enemy here. Robert looked up from his phone. I never said you were the enemy, ma'am. Like I mentioned, I didn't know about the permit requirement. If you'd just knocked on my door this morning and explained it, I would have been happy to reschedule. That's not how this works, Patricia replied, shaking her head. If we let one person slide, then everyone thinks the rules don't apply to them. It's a slippery slope. Next thing you know, people are parking RVs in their driveways, painting their houses neon colors, and letting their yards turn into jungles. Robert almost laughed at the dramatic escalation from a garage sale to neon houses, but he kept his face neutral. I understand the need for standards. I just think maybe calling the police is a bit much for a first offense, especially when the person is willing to fix the problem. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning my judgment? Not at all, Robert said calmly. Just sharing my perspective. Before Patricia could respond, a police cruiser turned onto the street. She immediately perked up, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. This was her moment of vindication. The authorities were here to prove she was right and put this rule breaker in his place. The patrol car pulled up to the curb in front of Robert's house. Two officers stepped out, a man and a woman, both in their standard uniforms. The male officer was younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of athletic build that suggested he spent his off hours at the gym. The female officer was a bit older, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in the entire scene in about 2 seconds. Patricia was already moving toward them before they'd even closed their car doors. Her folder was open, pages of printed bylaws ready to present as evidence. Officers, thank you so much for responding quickly, she started, her voice taking on an urgent tone. This man is conducting an illegal garage sale without the proper permits required by our homeowners association. I've asked him multiple times to cease operations, but he's refused to comply. I've documented everything here in my records. The male officer looked past Patricia to Robert, who was still sitting calmly in his folding chair. There was something in the officer's expression that changed. His eyes widened slightly, and he turned to his partner with a look that Robert recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who just realized they knew exactly who they were dealing with. Chief, the male officer said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and confusion. Robert stood up slowly, a small smile on his face. Morning, Rodriguez. Officer Mitchell. He nodded to both of them. Patricia's mouth, which had been open and ready to continue her complaint, slowly closed. Her eyes darted between Robert and the officers. Chief? What do you mean, Chief? Officer Rodriguez, the younger one, looked like he was trying very hard not to laugh. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, this is Detective Chief Robert Chen. He runs our entire detective division. The color drained from Patricia's face. Her leather folder dipped slightly in her hands. You're a police officer? Detective Chief, actually, Robert corrected gently. Have been for about 22 years now. Just got promoted to chief about 8 months ago. Officer Mitchell, the female officer, stepped forward professionally. She'd composed herself better than her partner, though there was definitely amusement in her eyes. Ma'am, we appreciate your call, but I have to be honest with you. Garage sales really aren't a police matter. Even if there are HOA violations, which we're not here to determine or enforce, this isn't something that requires law enforcement intervention. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red in the span of about 5 seconds. I didn't know. I mean, how was I supposed to know who he was? You weren't, Robert said, not unkindly. But maybe that's kind of the point. You called the police without even asking me my name or trying to have a conversation about it. You went straight to enforcement mode. Rodriguez was biting his lip, clearly trying to maintain his professional demeanor. Ma'am, if you have concerns about HOA violations, that's really something you need to work out between residents. Unless there's an actual crime being committed, which there isn't here, we can't shut down someone's garage sale. But the bylaws clearly state, Patricia started, holding up her folder. Those are civil bylaws, ma'am. Officer Mitchell interrupted gently but firmly. They're not criminal laws. If the HOA has an issue with one of its members, you have your own internal processes for that. Fines, warnings, whatever your organization's rules allow, but that's completely separate from law enforcement. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue more, but the words weren't coming. She kept looking at Robert, then at the officers, then back at Robert. Her whole power play had collapsed in on itself. She'd called the cops on a cop. On the cop, technically, since Robert outranked pretty much everyone in the local police department, except the actual chief of police. I apologize for wasting your time. Officers, Patricia finally managed to say, though she directed it at Rodriguez and Mitchell. Not at Robert. No problem, ma'am, Mitchell said. Have a good day. She turned to Robert. Sorry to bother you on your day off, Chief. Not your fault, Robert replied. Appreciate you two coming out. Rodriguez walked over to the tables, looking at the items. Hey, is that microwave still available? My sister just moved into a new apartment and she needs one. $20 and it's yours, Robert said. Works perfectly. I just upgraded to a bigger one. Deal. Rodriguez pulled out his wallet while Patricia stood there frozen, watching this casual transaction take place between the man she'd just tried to get arrested and the police officer she'd called to arrest him. Mitchell wandered over to look at the books. Oh, you've got the whole detective novel collection by Henderson. My dad loves these. Would you take 15 for all of them? Make it 12 and they're yours, Robert said. Father's Day is coming up, right? Not for another month, but I'll hide them until then. Mitchell smiled and handed him the cash. Patricia finally found her voice again. I need to go. I have other HOA matters to attend to. She was backing away, her folder clutched to her chest like a shield. Mrs. Hendricks? Robert called out before she could escape. She froze. For what it's worth, I do appreciate that you care about the neighborhood. Really. It's good to have people who pay attention and want to maintain standards. But maybe next time, try talking to people first before escalating. We're all neighbors here. Most problems can be solved with a simple conversation. Patricia nodded stiffly, clearly too embarrassed to form actual words. She turned and walked away quickly, her white polo shirt disappearing around the corner as she practically speed-walked back to wherever she'd come. From Rodriguez loaded the microwave into the trunk of the patrol car while Mitchell put her books in the front seat. They both thanked Robert again, trying and failing to hide their grins at what had just happened. This is going to be the best story at roll call on Monday, Rodriguez said as they got back in the car. Just don't embellish it too much, Robert called after them. The truth is funny enough. As the patrol car pulled away, Robert noticed movement from some of the nearby houses. Neighbors had been watching from windows and doorways. Within minutes, people started emerging, walking over to check out the garage sale. Word had clearly spread about what had just happened, and now everyone wanted to see for themselves. Tom, his neighbor, came back with his wife. Dude, that was amazing. Patricia's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Someone needed to knock her down a peg. I wasn't trying to embarrass her, Robert said honestly. I just wanted to sell some stuff. Well, you did both. Tom's wife laughed, picking up a set of wine glasses. And I'm buying these. Consider it a thank you for the entertainment. The rest of the morning turned into the busiest garage sale Robert had ever seen. It seemed like everyone in the neighborhood wanted to stop by, less for the items and more to hear the story firsthand. Robert told it modestly, leaving out the parts that made Patricia look too bad. But people were thrilled anyway. By noon, he'd sold about 70% of his stuff and made way more money than he'd expected. But more than that, he'd met more neighbors in one morning than he had in the previous 3 months, combined. Sometimes the best moments come from the most unexpected situations. The afternoon sun was starting to get warm when Robert decided to take a break. He'd been standing and chatting with neighbors for hours, and his feet were reminding him that he wasn't as young as he used to be. He grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler he'd brought out and sat down in the shade of his garage. The garage sale had turned into something completely different than what he'd planned. It wasn't really about selling stuff anymore. It had become a neighborhood gathering. People were standing around talking to each other, sharing stories about their own run-ins with Patricia and the HOA. Apparently, Robert wasn't the first person she'd gone after with her rulebook and threats. Mrs. Chen from across the street, no relation, despite sharing his last name, told him about the time Patricia had sent her a formal violation notice because her trash cans were visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. Another neighbor, a guy named David who lived 3 houses down, had gotten cited because his grass was apparently 1/4 inch taller than the maximum height allowed by HOA standards. Patricia had literally measured it. She made me feel like a criminal over grass, David said, shaking his head. And the worst part is you can't even argue with her. She's got that binder with all the rules printed out and highlighted, and she throws section numbers at you like she's quoting the Constitution. Robert listened to all of this with interest. In his line of work, he'd learned that understanding patterns of behavior was key to understanding people, and the pattern here was pretty clear. Patricia wasn't enforcing rules to make the neighborhood better. She was enforcing them to feel powerful. Around 2 in the afternoon, something unexpected happened. A silver sedan pulled up in front of Robert's house and Patricia stepped out. She wasn't wearing the white HOA polo anymore. She'd changed into a regular t-shirt and jeans, and she wasn't carrying her leather folder. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating without her uniform and props. The conversations around the driveway died down as people noticed her approach. There was an awkward tension in the air. A few people actually moved away like they were expecting another confrontation. But Patricia walked up to Robert slowly, her hands empty at her sides. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" she asked quietly. "Alone if possible?" Robert glanced at the neighbors who were watching with undisguised curiosity. "Sure, want to step over here?" He led her to the side of the garage where they had a bit more privacy, though he was pretty sure people were still trying to listen in. Patricia took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the half-hearted sorry I mumbled earlier when I was trying to escape." Robert waited, letting her continue at her own pace. "I was completely out of line this morning," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I didn't ask your name. I didn't try to have a conversation. I just saw what I decided was a violation and I went straight to nuclear option mode. And then I humiliated myself by calling the police on the chief of detectives over a garage sale." She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that's close to crying. God, when I really think about what I did, how ridiculous it was. "It's okay," Robert started, but Patricia held up her hand. "No, it's not okay. That's the problem. I've been telling myself my behavior is okay for years now. That I'm just doing my job as HOA president. That someone has to enforce the rules or everything falls apart." She looked around at the neighborhood, at the houses and the neat lawns and the quiet street. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a neighbor and became a cop. And not even a good cop, apparently, since I just got schooled by an actual cop on how to handle situations. Robert couldn't help but smile at that. "You weren't entirely wrong about needing some kind of order. Communities do need some standards. But yeah, maybe the approach could use some work." Patricia nodded. "After I left this morning, I went home and I was so angry. Not at you, at myself. Because seeing those officers treat you with respect, watching them buy stuff from your sale, joking around with you, it made me realize something. Nobody treats me like that. Nobody in this neighborhood is happy to see me coming. They avoid me. They probably talk about me behind my back, and honestly, I can't blame them." She pulled her phone out of her pocket and showed Robert the screen. It was the HOA group chat, and there were dozens of messages. "Look at this. The whole neighborhood is talking about what happened. But you know what? Nobody's defending me. Not one person said, 'Hey, Patricia was just doing her job,' or 'She has a point about the rules.' They're all sharing stories about times I've made them feel like garbage over minor things." Robert looked at the messages. They weren't mean-spirited exactly, but they painted a clear picture of someone who'd become the neighborhood villain without realizing it. "How long have you been HOA president?" Robert asked. 8 years, Patricia said. "Started right after my divorce. I think I threw myself into it because I needed something to control, you know? My marriage fell apart. My kids moved away for college and never really came back, and suddenly I had all this time and energy with nowhere to put it. The HOA gave me purpose. Or at least I thought it did." Robert understood more than she probably realized. He'd seen it plenty of times in his career. People who'd experienced loss or trauma often tried to regain control by controlling everything around them. It never really worked, but it was a common coping mechanism. "Can I tell you something from my experience?" Robert said. "In my job, I've learned that there are 2 ways to get people to follow rules. You can force them through fear and punishment, which works in the short term but builds resentment. Or you can lead by example and build relationships, which takes longer, but actually creates a community where people want to do the right thing." Patricia was listening intently now. Really listening, not just waiting for her turn to talk. "Take this morning," Robert continued. "You could have walked up to me, introduced yourself, welcomed me to the neighborhood, and then gently mentioned that garage sales need permits. You could have offered to help me apply for one right there on the spot. Maybe even offered to help me advertise it properly once I had the permit. I would have been grateful. I would have seen you as a helpful neighbor. Instead, the first time we meet, you threaten me and call the cops." "I know," Patricia said quietly. "I've been that person to everyone. The threatening, rule-enforcing person. No wonder nobody likes me." "It's not too late to change that," Robert said. "People are pretty forgiving if you're genuine about wanting to do better." Patricia looked doubtful. "I don't know. I've burned a lot of bridges. David over there, I made him pay a $50 fine for his grass. Mrs. Chen, I threatened to put a lien on her house over trash cans. How do you come back from that? You start by being human, Robert suggested. Admit you were wrong. Not just to me, but to them. And then you show through your actions that you've changed. That's what I tell young officers all the time. You can't just say you're going to be better. You have to prove it through consistent behavior over time. Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she looked at the table still full of items. Is that lamp still available? The blue one? Robert blinked at the subject change. Yeah. It's $15. I'll give you 20, Patricia said, pulling out her wallet. And I'd like to buy those bookends too if they're still here. The bookends are 10, Robert said, watching her curiously. Patricia handed him a $50 bill. Keep the change. Consider it a stupidity tax for my behavior this morning. Before Robert could argue, she picked up the lamp and bookends. And Robert? Thank you for not being cruel when you had every right to be. A lot of people would have enjoyed humiliating me more than you did. You could have made a big scene in front of everyone, really rubbed it in. But you didn't. That says a lot about your character. I'm not in the business of humiliating people, Robert said. I'm in the business of hoping people can be better than their worst moments. Patricia smiled. A real smile this time. Not the tight professional one she'd worn that morning. I'm going to try to be better. Starting now. And I think my first act as a reformed HOA president is going to be proposing we eliminate this stupid garage sale permit rule. It's bureaucratic nonsense that serves no actual purpose. That would be a good start, Robert agreed. Patricia walked back to her car with her purchases, and Robert noticed that a few neighbors nodded at her as she passed. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. It was a start. As she drove away, Tom wandered over. What was that about? She buying stuff now? People contain multitudes, Robert said with a shrug. Sometimes they just need a wake-up call to remember which parts of themselves they want to be. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. By the time the sun started setting, Robert had sold almost everything. His garage was going to have so much empty space. More importantly, he felt like he'd actually become part of the neighborhood today, not just a guy who lived in one of the houses. Sometimes the best things come from the worst starts. The following Tuesday evening, Robert was sitting in his living room going through case files when his doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment his cop instincts kicked in. He glanced through the peephole and was surprised to see Patricia standing on his porch, holding what looked like a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. He opened the door, genuinely curious now. Patricia, hi. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, and there was none of the aggressive confidence from their first meeting. She seemed almost nervous. I made too much lasagna and thought you might like some. It's a peace offering, I guess. A delicious, cheesy peace offering. Robert couldn't help but smile. That's really kind of you. Come on in. Patricia hesitated at the threshold. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding. I was just doing paperwork, which I'm always happy to take a break from. He held the door open wider and she stepped inside. His living room was neat, but clearly belonged to someone who worked long hours. There were a few moving boxes still stacked in the corner that he hadn't gotten around to unpacking. His coffee table had a laptop, several file folders, and an empty coffee mug on it. Still settling in. I see, Patricia observed as she handed him the casserole dish. 3 months in and I'm still finding boxes I forgot to open, Robert admitted. The job keeps me pretty busy. Some weeks I'm barely home except to sleep. Patricia looked around the room, and Robert noticed she was seeing it the way someone does when they're trying to understand a person better. The photos on the wall, the books on the shelf, the small details that tell a story. Detective Chief, she said thoughtfully, that must be a lot of responsibility. It has its moments, Robert said, but I love it. Even when it's frustrating, I can't imagine doing anything else. He gestured to the couch. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, water, tea? Water would be nice, thank you. When Robert came back from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water, Patricia was looking at a photo on his bookshelf. It showed a younger version of Robert in uniform with an older Asian man who had captain's bars on his collar. That's my dad, Robert said, handing her the water. He was a captain in the department for 30 years. Retired about 5 years ago. Is that why you became a cop? Following in his footsteps? Robert sat down in the armchair across from her. Partly, but also because I wanted to make a difference, you know? It sounds cliché, but when I was a kid, I saw how much my dad's work mattered. He came home tired every day, sometimes frustrated, sometimes sad, but always knowing he'd done something that mattered. I wanted that too. Patricia nodded slowly. My father was an accountant, very particular about numbers and rules and everything being in its proper place. I guess I inherited that from him, though I've been taking it to extremes lately. Speaking of which, Robert said, you didn't have to bring me lasagna. The apology on Saturday was enough. Maybe I needed to do it for myself, Patricia said. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About the 2 ways to get people to follow rules, and I realized I've been doing it wrong for a very long time. She took a sip of water and continued. I called an emergency HOA board meeting on Sunday. We have 5 board members total, and I told them everything that happened. How I called the cops on you, how it backfired, and how it made me realize I've been terrible at this job. What did they say? They were surprisingly supportive. Turns out they've been concerned about my approach for a while but didn't know how to bring it up without starting World War III. Patricia laughed dryly. One of them, Helen, she's been on the board almost as long as I have. She told me she'd been considering resigning because she couldn't stand how aggressive we'd become about enforcement. She said it felt like we were running a prison instead of a neighborhood association. Robert could see the pain in Patricia's expression as she recounted this. It's never easy to hear that you've been the problem. We spent 3 hours going through all our rules and policies. Patricia continued, really looking at them with fresh eyes. And you know what we discovered? About 40% of them serve no real purpose except to give us something to enforce. Like the garage sale permit rule. We implemented it 5 years ago because one person had a sale that lasted 3 days and someone complained. So instead of talking to that one person about being considerate, we created a blanket rule that punishes everyone. Bureaucracy tends to work that way, Robert said. One person does something annoying, so you create a rule that affects everyone. It's the same in police work sometimes. One officer makes a mistake and suddenly there's a new policy that makes everyone's job harder. Patricia nodded vigorously. Exactly. We're voting next month to eliminate about a dozen of these nonsense rules. The garage sale permit is first on the list. We're also completely restructuring how we handle violations. Instead of immediately sending formal notices and threats, we're going to try the radical concept of knocking on doors and having conversations. That's a big change, Robert said, impressed. How are the other board members feeling about it? Relieved, mostly. Turns out nobody actually enjoyed being the neighborhood police. We all just thought that's what the job required. Patricia set her water glass down on a coaster. But here's the thing. Making new rules is the easy part. The hard part is rebuilding relationships with people I've alienated. I've been the neighborhood villain for years. I can't just expect people to forget that overnight. Robert leaned back in his chair thinking, you're right, you can't. But you'd be surprised how quickly people can forgive when they see genuine change. People are generally pretty decent. They want to believe the best about their neighbors. I hope you're right, Patricia said. I've started reaching out to people I've been particularly harsh with. I went to David's house yesterday and apologized for the grass incident. Offered to refund his fine out of my own pocket. He wouldn't take the money, but he accepted the apology. Said everyone deserves a second chance, and that's generous of him. It is. More generous than I deserve, honestly. Patricia looked down at her hands. I also went to see Mrs. Chen. Apologized for the trash can thing and about a dozen other petty complaints I'd filed about her property over the years. She actually cried, Robert. She told me she'd been so stressed about HOA violations that she was considering moving. Can you imagine? Making someone want to leave their home because of trash can placement? Robert could see that Patricia was genuinely wrestling with the weight of her past actions. That was good. It meant the change was real. The fact that you're doing this, going door to door to apologize, that takes courage, Robert said. A lot of people would just quietly change their behavior and hope everyone forgets how they used to be. You're actively trying to make amends. That matters. Patricia's eyes were a bit wet now. I wasted so much time being angry and controlling. After my divorce, I was so hurt, and I think I wanted everyone else to hurt too. Or maybe I just wanted to feel powerful because I felt so powerless in my personal life. Whatever the reason, I turned into someone I don't like very much. The good news is you're not that person anymore, Robert pointed out. Or at least you're choosing not to be that person. That's all any of us can do. We can't change the past, but we can choose who we want to be going forward." Patricia wiped her eyes and laughed. "You're very wise for a guy who just wanted to have a garage sale. 22 years of dealing with people at their worst and their best teaches you a lot about human nature," Robert said with a smile. They talked for another hour. Patricia told him about her kids, who she was trying to rebuild relationships with after years of being too controlling with them too. Robert told her about some of the challenges of his job, the satisfaction of solving cases and the frustration of the ones that got away. It was the kind of conversation neighbors have when they're actually becoming friends. When Patricia finally left, she paused at the door. "Thank you for this, for the conversation, for the advice on Saturday, for not holding a grudge. You could have made me the laughingstock of the neighborhood, but you didn't." "That wouldn't have helped anything," Robert said. "Besides, everyone's fighting some kind of battle we don't know about. Sounds like you've been fighting yours for a while." "I have," Patricia admitted. "But I think I'm finally ready to stop fighting and start living again." After she left, Robert reheated some of the lasagna she'd brought. It was actually delicious. As he ate, he thought about how strange life could be. A week ago, this woman was threatening to have him arrested over a garage sale. Tonight, they'd had a genuine conversation about life, regret, and change. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom next door. "Did I just see Patricia leaving your house? Are you two friends now? What is happening?" Robert typed back, "People change. Sometimes they just need a reason to." He looked at the photo of his dad on the bookshelf. His father had always told him that the best part of police work wasn't catching the bad guys. It was the moments when you could actually help someone become better. Robert hadn't expected to have one of those moments during a garage sale. But life had a funny way of surprising you. Sometimes the people who seem the most difficult are just the ones who need understanding the most. 3 weeks after the garage sale incident, Robert found himself sitting in a folding chair in the community center at the monthly HOA meeting. He'd never planned to attend one of these things. Between his demanding schedule and his general lack of interest in bureaucratic meetings, it had been low on his priority list. But Patricia had personally invited him, and something in her voice suggested this meeting was going to be important. The community center was more crowded than Robert had expected. Usually these meetings drew maybe 10 or 15 people, according to Tom, who'd filled him in on what to expect. Tonight, there had to be at least 50 residents packed into the room. Word had clearly gotten around that something big was happening. Patricia stood at the front of the room with the other 4 board members. She looked nervous, Robert noticed. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and she kept glancing at her notes. This wasn't the confident, rule-wielding woman who'd confronted him in his driveway. This was someone who was about to be vulnerable in front of a lot of people who had good reasons not to like her. The meeting started with the usual boring stuff. Minutes from the last meeting, financial reports, updates on landscaping contracts. Robert found his mind wandering until Patricia stepped up to the microphone. "Before we move to new business," she said, her voice only slightly shaky, "I need to address something personal. Many of you have heard about an incident that happened a few weeks ago involving me and one of our newer residents." The room got very quiet. Everyone knew exactly what incident she was talking about. For those who haven't heard, I called the police on a neighbor for having a garage sale without a permit. It turns out that neighbor was Detective Chief Robert Chen. She gestured toward Robert, and suddenly 50 pairs of eyes turned to look at him. He gave a small wave, feeling slightly awkward. "I made a fool of myself, yes, but more importantly, I did something I've been doing to many of you for years. I saw a rule violation and I went straight to punishment without any consideration for the person involved." Patricia took a deep breath. "That incident was a wake-up call for me. It forced me to look at how I've been operating as your HOA president, and I didn't like what I saw. So I want to start tonight by offering a public apology to everyone in this room. I've been a terrible neighbor. I've prioritized rules over relationships, enforcement over empathy, and control over community. I'm sorry." The silence in the room was profound. People glanced at each other, unsure how to react. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Helen, one of the other board members, stood up next to Patricia. "The entire board has spent the last 3 weeks reviewing our policies and procedures. We've realized that somewhere along the way we stopped serving this community and started policing it. That changes tonight." For the next 30 minutes, the board went through a list of proposed changes. The garage sale permit requirement was being eliminated entirely. The grass height restrictions were being relaxed from a rigid measurement to a reasonable standard of well-maintained. The rules about trash convisibility were being changed from must not be visible for more than 2 hours to please bring them in within a day when possible. But the biggest change was in how violations would be handled going forward. Instead of formal notices and fines, the first step would always be a friendly conversation. The second step would be offering to help solve the problem. Only repeated intentional violations after multiple conversations would result in fines. "We want this to feel like a neighborhood again," Patricia said. "Not a municipality with codes and enforcement. We're all just people trying to live our lives. The HOA should exist to help us do that better, not to make everyone walk on eggshells in their own homes." When she opened the floor for discussion, Robert expected pushback. In his experience, people didn't like change, even when it was change for the better. But the first person to raise their hand was Mrs. Chen. "I just want to say thank you," she said, her voice emotional. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and the last 5 have been stressful in a way they shouldn't have been. I'm grateful that you're willing to admit mistakes and make changes." "That takes real courage." David stood up next. "I second that. And I want to say, Patricia, I know it probably wasn't easy to stand up here and apologize like that. I respect it. I'm willing to give this new approach a chance." One by one, other residents shared similar sentiments. There were a few questions about specific rules and how enforcement would work under the new system, but the overall tone was positive. People were tired of feeling like they were constantly being watched and judged. They wanted what Patricia was offering, a return to normalcy. As the meeting was wrapping up, a younger woman in the back raised her hand. "I just moved in 2 months ago, so I don't have history with the old way of doing things. But I want to say, this is exactly the kind of neighborhood I was hoping to join, one where people actually care about each other as people. So thank you for making these changes." After the meeting officially ended, people didn't rush out the door like they usually did. Instead, they stayed and talked. Small groups formed. Conversations flowed, and Robert noticed Patricia moving through the crowd, talking to people, listening more than she spoke. She had that lamp and those bookends on a table near the entrance with a sign that said, "Reminders that everyone deserves grace." Tom found Robert near the refreshments table. "Well, that was unexpected. I've been coming to these meetings for 6 years, and I've never seen anything like that." "People want to believe in redemption," Robert said, watching Patricia laugh at something Mrs. Chen was saying. "They want to think that people can change, and when someone actually does the work to change, really does it, people respond to that." "You had something to do with this, didn't you?" Tom asked. "I mean, beyond just being the catalyst with the garage sale thing," Robert shrugged. "I just treated her like a person instead of a villain. Turns out that's all she needed." A few minutes later, Patricia made her way over to Robert. Her eyes were bright and she looked lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying a weight and finally put it down. "Thank you for coming," she said. "And for everything else. I know I said it before, but I mean it. You changed my life that Saturday morning." "You changed your own life," Robert corrected. "I just sold some stuff and happened to have a badge. You did all the hard work of actually examining yourself and choosing to be different." "Still," Patricia insisted, "if you'd been cruel when you had every right to be, if you'd humiliated me or held a grudge, I probably would have just gotten defensive and doubled down on being awful. You gave me space to see myself clearly. That's a gift," Robert smiled. "Well, I'm glad the garage sale worked out for more than just clearing out my stuff. Speaking of which," Patricia said with a mischievous grin, "now that we've eliminated the permit requirement, you should have another one. The whole neighborhood would show up just for the entertainment value of watching where that lamp and those bookends are displayed." Robert laughed. "I don't have anything left to sell. You helped me clean out my garage pretty thoroughly. Well, when you accumulate more stuff, you know where to find me for help advertising it." Over the following months, the neighborhood transformed in small but noticeable ways. People started having more front yard conversations. Impromptu block parties happened. Kids played outside more because parents weren't worried about violating some obscure noise ordinance. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a group of neighbors helping each other maintain a nice place to live. Patricia changed too, in ways beyond just her HOA approach. She started attending a book club that Mrs. Chen ran. She took up gardening and could often be seen working in her yard, chatting with whoever walked by. Her kids started calling more often, and she even mentioned they were planning to visit for Thanksgiving. One evening, about 6 months after the garage sale, Robert was out for his evening run when he saw Patricia sitting on her front porch with a cup of tea, those bookends visible through her window. He slowed down and called out, "Evening, Patricia." "Evening, Robert. Good run?" "Getting there. Only 2 more miles to go." "You're making me tired just watching you," she laughed. "Hey, a few of us are having a barbecue this Saturday if you're free. Nothing fancy, just neighbors hanging out." "I'll be there," Robert promised, and he meant it. As he continued his run, Robert thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. A simple garage sale had turned into a catalyst for real change in an entire community. It reminded him why he loved his job, not the cases or the criminals or the investigations, but the moments when people surprised you by being better than you expected. He'd learned a long time ago that most people aren't truly good or bad. They're just people, trying their best and sometimes failing, capable of being petty and noble, selfish and generous, often in the same day. Patricia had shown him that even someone who seemed irredeemably difficult could change when given the right push and the space to grow. The neighborhood had gotten a better HOA president. Patricia had gotten her life back. And Robert had gotten something he hadn't even known he was missing, a real community to come home to, after long days of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, all because he'd wanted to sell some old furniture and kitchen gadgets he didn't need anymore. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person who seems like your enemy just needs someone to see them as human. Robert had learned that lesson dozens of times in his career, but it never got old. Every time someone chose to be better, to grow, to change, it renewed his faith in people, and that faith, more than anything else, was what kept him going in a job that could easily make you cynical. As Robert rounded the corner toward home, he could see lights on in houses, families having dinner, people living their lives. It was a good neighborhood. It always had been. It just needed someone to remember that neighborhoods are made of people, not rules. And now, finally, everyone remembered.